Jesus says, I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. And I was texting somebody, and actually they texted me. I didn't know who they were. And I said, I'm afraid, I texted them back and said, I'm afraid I don't know who this is. And they responded with, what are you afraid of? And what they did is they magnified a particular aspect of what I said. The fact that I happened to use the word afraid, instead of understanding the way that's just a figure of speech that people use when they're trying to be polite and say, I don't have your contact info on my phone, they, capitalized on that word afraid. And what are you afraid of? Well, I'm not afraid really of anything. It's just a figure of speech. I'm just trying to let you know I may not recognize your number, and I'm sorry if I should and don't, or something like that, but I'm afraid I don't know who this is. So the intent of telling them that was to convey that I don't know who they are, but they magnified the aspect of fear, even though, because that word afraid appeared in what I said, even though that wasn't the intent of what I was trying to say. Now, this happens at every level, and in debate, the reason debate is no good is because in debate, you're trying to do that to people. In debate, you're trying to catch people on poorly worded things and then weaponize it against them. You said this. You said this. And especially with husbands and wives, Rule Omega is great for a marital relationship. If you're constantly taking phrases that your husband or wife says, and Thursday you said this, but now today you're saying this, and trying to weaponize and hold them against them to show that they are contradictory, if you're constantly doing that to them, you are reciprocally narrowing the agent arena attunement relationship with that person, and you are facilitating the falling out of love process. That's what you're doing when you do that to people. That's not how to interact with people. You need to have grace with people. Figure out if the exact phrasing seems to be contradictory, that's your clue to dial in and try to figure out what the intent was or what the new intent was. My wife and I, we've had a few issues we've had to deal with, and there's been times where I will say something one day, and then I'll come back 2 days later and say, you know what? I've still been, I'm in the process of thinking this through, and I think what I really meant was this. And she gives me the grace to completely redact how things were said before and completely load into the intent that was still in the formation process. She gives me grace to do that. If she did not give me the grace to do that, the relationship would start to break down very quickly. Okay? So you have to be like that with each other. You have to be like that with each other in any kind of relationship, marital, church relationships, friendships. This is the best way to interact with people at all, anyway. I had a conversation with a woman last night she and her husband were about to leave the area where we were, but we were sitting and talking. She was talking about this church that they found and how it's all wonderful. And I was able to sit there and talk to her and ask her and draw out of her the things that made them change churches, the things that made them pull out of their denomination, what she's getting out of it, and how it affects her in her day-to-day life. Okay, and I was able to assess a few things. I mean, she, without realizing this, she was telling me that she was stage 4, and I was hearing all these other really wonderful things that I could use. So it was a pretty exciting time, and I just got to sit there and draw this stuff out. Okay, and it was fun. It was good. It's a good way to interact with people. Looking at some of these comments down here. See if I can find the signal in here. After we recognize in Rule Omega that everyone has some signal. Everyone has some signal. And our job is to try to draw it out and figure out what that is. And maybe you lack the capacity or skill set to draw that signal out, or the ability to see what the signal is, or the degree of experience that's required to see the relevance of what that signal is. And so there isn't your salience landscape, your recursive relevance realization might not be in the place to where you recognize the signal that's there, because for whatever reason it's not relevant to you. So maybe recognize that that's a shortcoming on your part. If you think there's no signal in something that's being said, maybe that's a shortcoming on your part, not on theirs. But everyone has some signal. Every message has some signal. Rule Omega is designed for the expression of something difficult. It's for conversations that break new ground. It is not for restating or bolstering established ground. Okay? So if I'm trying to break new ground, we're forging forward beyond what our belief system is into kind of unknown territory, because maybe the problem that we're trying to solve, the solutions are in our unknown. So we're trying to forge ahead into our unknown area and figure that out. And most people think by talking out loud. We're talking out our thoughts. And we have the other people to help us think by drawing out the signal that's trying to be said. So it's for conversations that are breaking new ground. If you are in a Bible study where everyone has towed the line on a statement of faith or systematic theology or confession of faith, that is not where Rule Omega can be. There's no point for that, okay? And you don't use Rule Omega to bolster or restate or established ground. Like, we're not trying to reinforce the London Baptist Confession of 1689 or Grudem's systematic theology. That's not what Rule Omega is for. That's for the sandbox. It's for the kiddies. That's stage 3 people and who are, embedded in rivalry and ego and all that kind of stuff. That's for them. There's no need for that in Rule Omega, and people who are there cannot participate in Rule Omega. They're not capable of participating in Rule Omega. Somebody said that sounds like Rule Omega is something you guys use for narrative control, and that's what something like that. Actually, it's the exact opposite of that. It's actually not control. It's letting everybody have an emotionally and psychologically placed to say what they need to say without being condemned as a heretic for doing so.